Hello, everybody. Eric Grenier here, and welcome to the 126th episode of the Writ Podcast. It's been about 7 months since Wab Kinew was sworn in as the new Premier of Manitoba, and the poll suggests that Wab Kinew and the NDP are enjoying a bit of a honeymoon, but that will be put to the test very soon when voters go to a by-election in the riding of Tuxedo. Meanwhile, the opposition PCs don't have a leader, and there will be a federal by-election taking place in Winnipeg later this year. So to break down the state of politics in Manitoba, I'm joined this week by Ian Froese, the CBC's provincial affairs reporter in Winnipeg. Ian, thanks for coming back.
Thanks for having me.
Like I said, there's lots to discuss, and I want to get into some of the specifics on the by-elections that are on the docket. But first, a bit of a general overview. It's been, like I said, about 7 months since Wab Kinew was sworn in as Premier. It's a new government. How has the transition been for the NDP that had been in opposition for 7 years, now being back in power?
As you noted, this has been a honeymoon period, and we look at Heather Stefanson being the Premier before. At that time, Angus Reid had her as the least popular Premier in the country, and now it's a complete 180. We have Wab Kinew in Manitoba, and he's now seen as the most popular Premier in all of Canada. This is definitely a honeymoon period. This has been a government that has been, in a lot of ways they've tried to please everybody, but they are sort of just really riding that wave of popularity. I see a lot of parallels between the Wab Kinew now and Justin Trudeau in 2015. People want selfies with him. His social media is filled with compliments. There's memes going around about the moment when he changed a tire of someone while, leaving, I think, a funeral. And those memes are populating everywhere. There's been fawning profiles from national media when they come and see Wab Kinew as being someone who really prides himself on being a leader who tries to bring people together and doesn't use isn't trying to pick fights with other levels of governments or divisiveness. In the early months, some of his measures have been fairly, symbolic. They've, made Orange Shirt Day a holiday in Manitoba. They've honored Louis Riel as the title of honorary first Premier of Manitoba, and also made steady progress on a number of election promises. His commitment to cut the gas tax or make it a holiday from 14 cents to zero has been quite popular. The reminder of it being whenever you drive around Winnipeg, you see the gas prices. And especially when it started in January, it was just $1.10 a liter. Some of sort of the big things, he made a big point of, I'm going to fix the healthcare system. Not a whole ton of progress has been done on that, if any, in some regards, but there is a feeling among the Manitoba public here that they are giving the NDP, the benefit of the doubt and giving them time to make progress on some of their big initiatives.
What's your impression, going around in the legislature, how the new MLAs who are now cabinet ministers, who before might have just been opposition, might have not even been in the legislature for 2023, are they still looking for the bathrooms, or are they starting to get comfortable in the job?
They are indeed starting to get comfortable. Again, it is only a few months, so the major controversies haven't really come up yet. So they are still able to. Yeah, they haven't gotten themselves too dirty so far. The NDP staff has been sort of keen on, as what tends to happen with new governments, is make them more available for media. So they are getting sort of that media training. They are getting some exposure. But also, Wab Kinew being, popular and really quite a polished speaker and communicator, he is taking the lead, undoubtedly. So this is clearly a Wab Kinew government.
Have you noticed any significant changes between the PC government, the outgoing one, and the incoming NDP government in terms of the communication style, their leadership style? Just is the mood different, I guess, in the legislature than it was prior to last October?
Yeah, definitely. There is that more openness, and they are talking to media more, holding more media conferences. Again, it's early days, so we'll see when the rubber hits the road. But what really maybe stands out for me about this NDP government is how image conscious they are. again, I've alluded to Wab Kinew. He was a broadcaster and a public speaker, so he can really hold an audience, and the party is rightfully using that to their advantage. But like also in his inner circle, his inner circle of four, two of them have communication experience while being in opposition. His chief of staff has a family connection to media and journalism, and then Wab Kinew himself being a journalist in a past life. So they all have that knowledge of how the media works to a certain degree, so they're quite shrewd in that regard. Like I'll bring up an example just in the last week. The PCs in the last year of their government decided to spend more money, which tends to happen when a government is probably on the outs. So one of the things they raised or added more money to was this Green Team program, which allows youth groups and camps and sports organizations to hire youth over the summer for summer jobs. The NDP cut that funding, so a little bit of pushback. And after a few days, a bunch of those groups came into the legislature on the defense or on the advice of the PCs. And right away, the NDP's like, we're going to meet with you. We're going to have a meeting. And then after question period, rather than all those group of people going out to talk to the media, they were all intercepted. The government met with all of them, had them all in a room. It speaks, I would say, it speaks to really a shrewd communication strategy, and also really being aware of what the blowback is that's out there and trying to dampen it. And, just earlier this week, the NDP.
It'll be interesting to see how that will change over time, right? Because when you're very image conscious and things are going well, then you can kind of exploit, that interest and the skills that you have there. What's it going to be like when they're up against some challenges and maybe they don't want to talk with the media so much? They don't want to be in the spotlight, but we'll see how that goes. It's still early days. The really interesting thing coming up over the next few weeks, at least for me, might not be for everybody, but for me, it's a by-election. I love by-elections. And there's going to be a by-election on June 18th in the riding of Tuxedo. Is it as wealthy as the name sounds?
That's good. That's good. It is well-to-do. It's probably the most well-to-do seat in Winnipeg, if not maybe another. It's in West Central. This riding has been PC since the beginning. This was Heather Stefanson's seat before she resigned, former premier. Also, Gary Filmon, former premier, had that seat before. This is a seat that's always gone PC, and it has some more wealthier households and individuals.
I was looking at the history of the area. The riding, has changed over time, but the last time the PCs didn't win it was, I think, in 1950 something. It was 1958 they've held it since that time, so it just shows how much of a safe riding it should be. But it was pretty close last time. It was only a couple points between Heather Stefanson and the NDP's candidate, which was a surprise for me and I think a lot of observers on election night. So Heather Stefanson, no longer leader of the PCs, decides she's going to resign. Telegraphed she's going to resign, I would say months ago, but made it clear a few weeks ago. And then the NDP calls a by-election really only a few weeks after the vacancy comes up. Why did the NDP call this so quickly? I mean, federally, we're waiting for some by-elections. That's, places have been vacant for 3-4 months, but this was only a few days, really.
I would say it's strike when the iron is hot. And, the NDP sees the polling that they've got. And they also knew that the other parties were not ready. The PCs were going to pick their candidate on June 5th. They have a contested nomination. But, the by-election is now June 18th, so you almost can't wait, halfway through to pick your candidate. So they're rushing and going to do that, just this week. And it frankly came as a surprise because the PCs did not see it. They denied being caught flat-footed, but, they weren't ready to pick their candidate. And normally you get a sense, at least in Manitoba, of when a by-election is coming because you see the announcements ramp up in the days before and all sort of the talk around town and at the legislature. But here the NDP did not really telegraph anything. They just, just on holiday Monday deciding we're calling it in 4 weeks.
So this, like I said, it was close last time. the kind of polls that we've seen, there hasn't been that many in Manitoba, but the polls that we have seen since the election suggest the NDP's up in Winnipeg, the PCs are down, more than enough to overcome the kind of margin that was there in the last election. So how is this looking in terms of whether the New Democrats can actually win this, whether the PCs can hold this? How do both parties see their chances in this?
Yeah, the NDP does think they can win, and that's part of the reason why they're going now rather than maybe in the fall when maybe the polls might change a bit. Wab Kinew just a few weeks ago was asked about Tuxedo, and he said, I wish we would have went canvassing there. The party did not put in a lot of effort, and they came within 300 votes. So they now see that this is an opportunity for them. The PCs, as you noted right off the top, they don't have their leader now. They don't have much of an identity at this point. So now if the NDP puts resources in, this might be as good a shot as they have. Again, this still is a Tory stronghold, so it won't be easy. And now Heather Stefanson became quite unpopular. Now that she's out of the picture, do some Tory voters who might have been reluctant or stayed home, do they maybe come out on June 18th?
The NDP does have a candidate already, so it's a registered nurse. She ran back in 2019. PCs, as we're recording on Thursday. They're actually going to decide who their candidate is on Thursday night, so we can't really discuss who the candidate's going to be. In your sense, because when I've watched elections, particularly in on Ontario, you're looking at suburb riding around Toronto, where the local candidate usually doesn't matter that much. Will the local candidate matter a lot in a riding like Tuxedo?
I think the local candidate might matter more for the PCs. There is a former MLA in the discussion. There are two members of the Jewish community, and I should note that when we were talking about the makeup, there is quite a Jewish population here. Two of these three candidates, again, we'll find out shortly who that individual is. So, that well-connected candidate might really help. On the PC side, for the NDP, like they did in the election, this is Wab Kinew's party and his brand. And, the Premier likes to talk about healthcare and the challenges and how bad it got under the PCs. And here he has a candidate that he can just say, she's a registered nurse. She gets it. So I think in the NDP's case, it might be more the leader than anything else, and just the government in general. The PCs, if they have sort of a well-connected candidate, that will help their chances for sure.
There's going to be a couple other candidates on the ballot. So we already know that Janine Gibson, the Green Party leader, is going to run there, and the Liberals, who took over 20% of the vote here, decided not to go with a well-known candidate. They just chose their candidate earlier this week.
The Liberals, despite having struggles electorally in the election, they went from 3 seats down to 1. They do still tend to attract some good candidates. So, they could have went with their deputy leader. It's a volunteer capacity at this point. Willard Reeves, well-known former Winnipeg Blue Bomber, star running back in the 1980s, and who had some success in Fort White. Success in the sense that he nearly stole a Tory stronghold in Fort White around 2 years ago. Would have been a good candidate, but the Liberals opting for a local resident, but someone who has become well-known over the last 6 months in Jamie Fow, president of the Manitoba Foster Parents Association, has spoken out for children in care and child welfare. So again, someone with some level of name recognition, although, maybe not to the same degree as Willard Reeves. But I mean, it does speak well for the party that they are able to get two people with some degree of recognition or name recognition.
And the Greens, they had a pretty poor election last time, but two elections ago got about 8% of the vote here. So the NDP would probably prefer that they're not on the ballot here.
Yeah, that's true. The Green Party, really lost a lot of their popular votes in the election we just had last fall. So they've become less of a player. Janine Gibson is the leader. She talks about the fact that they are rebuilding. This might be part of that rebuild effort, but not anticipating a whole lot there.
Okay, so we have the by-election on June 18th. As you mentioned, the Conservatives or the PCs don't have a leader, so it has to kind of be the local candidate who's going to carry the baton there. How is the PC leadership race shaping up? Because it doesn't seem they're in much of a rush to choose a successor to Heather Stefanson.
The party's not in a rush, and the prospective candidates aren't in a rush either. It's April of 2025 when the vote is scheduled to happen. So lots of time here. So no one has officially put their name in the running. Former MLA Kevin Klein is, he says he's thinking about it. But he had an option here to run in Tuxedo and chose not to, which might, maybe he thought that was a hard road to take. Carla Devlin, who is rural municipality Reeve, she is thinking of running, but, she said, I want a rural seat. And speaking with confidence that, that might materialize, even though there's nothing, at least on the verge right now, of a rural MLA, at least it seems at this point, of stepping down. Maybe she has some inside knowledge on that piece. Avi Khan, one of the MLAs, is considering it. He's thinking of running. And also, we should note, Wayne Owasco, the interim leader of the PCs, has not ruled out running for the leader as well. Now, that's not normally, I guess it's not too conventional for the interim leader to be like, I'm still thinking about it, but he has kind of brushed aside any of those kind of concerns and is leaving the door open himself. So those are four names that are in the conversation, but no real rush, it seems, at this point in terms of any of them putting their name forward.
They have, I think, instituted some new rules, though, right, to avoid some of the problems they had in the last race that Heather Stefanson won.
Yeah, this will limit the, I guess, limit the amount of weight that individual constituency associations have. Obviously, there's, which happens in numerous provinces, is, you can have a lot of your grassroots in rural areas, and they maybe lean a little more social conservative, but, especially in Manitoba, when 70% of the population lives in Winnipeg, you need Winnipeg. And right now, when we talk about the PCs not really having much of an identity now, they only have 3 seats out of 30, 31, 32 in Winnipeg are theirs. They are predominantly rural. They will need to make inroads. Obviously, they've got some years to make progress, but they have quite the hill to climb at this point.
Yeah, the last race, Shelley Glover nearly won it, and it was kind of perceived as almost like a takeover by more the further right of the party. So it seems like they're trying to avoid that. It went to a court hearing in the end to decide who had actually won. So I think they want something a little bit less dramatic than last time. Why don't we move to some of the federal politics there? Because, we don't often talk about Winnipeg as being much of a battleground. There hasn't been a lot of change in the representation over the last few federal elections. There's going to be a by-election at some point this year. Daniel Blakey resigned his seat in Elmwood, Transcona at the end of March, I believe. And so there has to be a by-election called between now and the end of September. The NDP won it by a wide margin, but the Conservatives are up so much in the polls. How are those two parties looking at this by-election?
I would expect a real fight between, both the NDP and the Conservatives. Also this week, NDP choosing Leila Dance, a well-connected business leader, as their candidate. What's noteworthy there for the NDP is that it's not a Blakey. It's not Daniel Blakey. It's not Bill Blakey. That family is synonymous with NDP politics in the east end of Winnipeg. So now they must try with someone else. So, that creates a challenge. But the Conservatives, which, polls look favorably for them across the country, they're also expecting to take seats in Winnipeg. Many seats, especially around the suburbs, will be in play for the Conservatives, and this will be one of them. It is worth noting that once the riding changes a little bit, the boundaries of it, this will become a little more rural, so it will work in the Conservatives' favor. That will help them when the federal election takes place. But for now, with this by-election, once it's called, that does favor the NDP a little more. but I would anticipate, a real fight between those two. The Conservatives have yet to announce their candidate.
Yeah, I would say the Conservatives should be putting some effort into this, because they held it, I think they won in 2011, I think it was, when they last held this seat. And you mentioned the Blakeys. Rebecca Blakey also might have been an option, right? I think she was the president of the party for a time, but I guess she didn't want to continue the family name, at least not in Elmwood, Transcona for now. You mentioned, Wab Kinew not having kind of disagreements, picking fights with other premiers or for the prime minister. First of all, how would you characterize that relationship so far between Wab Kinew and Justin Trudeau?
Yeah, Justin Trudeau's probably chalking this up as a win. When there's so many premiers throughout the country that take any opportunity to bash him, the fact that Wab Kinew does not, or he sometimes he does some sort of gymnastics in trying to avoid criticizing in some way while still sort of arguing his position. Something like the carbon tax. He's not saying the carbon tax is bad, but after a few weeks of being sort of unsure where he stood, he was eventually like, we don't think it's necessary here, the federal carbon tax, that we can get to net zero with another way. So he is planning to come up with an alternative. Justin Trudeau has made a few appearances here and likes to note that it's good to have another progressive partner. Wab Kinew also, in some ways, legitimized Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader, when he agreed to do a bit of a photo op with him. Something, he definitely not required to do that with the leader of the opposition in Ottawa, yet he chose to do that, and so obviously that was a win for Pierre Poilievre. All the parties wanting to, shake hands with the most popular premier. And of course, the federal NDP leader as well has, taken his chances to get photo ops with Mr. Kinew as well.
Do you think that Jagmeet Singh and the NDP, do you get a sense that they're hoping to ride some of the coattails there in Manitoba? I'm not sure if they have many prospects for gains, but maintaining at least what they have is not going to be a given, right? So is there going to be any afterglow for the federal NDP from Wab Kinew's honeymoon?
Undoubtedly, they're hoping for it. I don't think anything is really translated at this point. I think, when we talk about the federal election and potentially 2025, they are likely to hold on to the seats that they have. But again, we're speaking of Elmwood, Transcona with this coming by-election. It will be harder for them to hold on, first of all, with someone who's not a Blakey. And then secondly, once the seat becomes a little more rural, it has more of that vote. So the federal NDP will be hoping to benefit from Wab Kinew and the provincial NDP, but we'll see what happens.
And just broad, like across Winnipeg, we talk about, so Elmwood, Transcona will get an early test of what's happening there. I assume Kevin Lamoureux, as a Lamoureux, is unbeatable in Winnipeg North. You have the NDP seemingly pretty well ensconced in Winnipeg Centre, but some of the more suburban seats could be potentially up for grabs in the next election.
Yeah, Winnipeg North with Kevin Lamoureux, that might be the hardest of the suburb seats for the Conservatives to take. Winnipeg, I guess South Centre with Ben Carr will also be a bit more of a challenge. Again, that's a little more central in the city, but St. Boniface, St. Vital, right just along the south, those will be for sure. The Conservatives will have a lot of interest in that, and there has been some former MLAs that have talked at least about considering a run there, and the federal Conservatives have been fairly choosy at this point. No names or few names have really come forward at this point, or at least been announced as the. Frankly, a lot of people want those to run for the Conservatives because this is a party on the up and ups. So.
Yeah, and if you're a Manitoba Conservative, there's not that many options for you. So I'm guessing, if you can run in Winnipeg South or St. Boniface, St. Vital, those are your best options, right? Because they hold already all of the rural seats aside from the north. So it'll be interesting to see if there'll be a lot of visits over the next year to Winnipeg by the various leaders hoping to, target a few of those seats, but Manitoba is going to be a smaller battleground, of course, than some of the other parts of the country, but we'll get an early taste in Elmwood, Transcona. So, Ian, I really appreciate you joining the podcast to give us a little bit of a glimpse of how things are going in Manitoba after the first few months, and maybe we'll check in, see how their image strategy and their media strategy will change as things get a little bit tougher for a government in power. So, Ian, thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
We'll keep an eye. Thanks for having me.